Security, remove her. The words hadn't been spoken yet, but they were already hanging in the air, waiting to land. Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's story, I'd really appreciate your support. Take a quick moment to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. It's completely free and helps us keep bringing you more powerful and emotional content. Also, I'd love to know where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thanks so much for being here. The morning light poured through towering glass panels, casting long reflections across the polished marble floors of Langford Plaza, one of the most exclusive luxury complexes in downtown Chicago. Designer boutiques lined the corridors, their displays curated to perfection, guarded by subtle security and an unspoken rule. Only a certain kind of person belonged here. And then, Evelyn Carter walked in. No announcement, no entourage, just a woman in a simple gray dress, flat shoes, and a calm expression that didn't ask for attention and didn't need it. Her footsteps were soft, almost lost beneath the echo of heels clicking somewhere in the distance. But her eyes moved differently. They didn't wander like a visitor's. They assessed, noticed, measured. The brushed brass handles on the storefronts, the lighting angles above the central atrium, the faint scuff mark near the east entrance column, something most people would never see. Evelyn paused briefly, her fingers grazing the cool surface of a marble pillar. Not out of curiosity, out of familiarity, as if she'd known it long before it was ever placed there. A few steps ahead, a cluster of women gathered near a high-end jewelry boutique, their voices light but sharp, wrapped in designer fabrics and effortless confidence. At the center stood Victoria Langford, elegant, composed, and accustomed to being the standard by which others were measured. Her silver blonde hair was styled flawlessly, her posture unshaken, her presence commanding without effort. The kind of woman who didn't just belong in places like this, she defined them. Or at least, she believed she did. Her laughter rang out, polished and controlled, until it faltered, just slightly, as her gaze shifted, landed, on Evelyn. There was a pause, barely noticeable to most. But it was there. A flicker of confusion, followed by something colder. Judgment. Victoria's eyes moved slowly, deliberately, taking in every detail of Evelyn's appearance. The simplicity, the lack of labels, the quiet confidence that didn't match the setting. Around her, the other women followed her gaze, their expressions shifting in unison, curiosity turning into amusement. Soft whispers began to ripple through the group. Not loud, just enough. Enough to be heard, enough to be felt. Evelyn continued walking, unbothered. Or at least she appeared that way. Her posture remained steady, her pace unhurried. But there was something else now. A stillness beneath the surface. The kind that didn't come from uncertainty, but from control. Victoria tilted her head slightly, lips curling into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. She stepped forward, heels clicking against the marble, each step echoing with quiet authority. The space around them seemed to shift, conversations dimming, attention subtly drawn toward the unfolding moment. Because everyone in that room understood one thing. This wasn't just an encounter. It was a test. And they were certain. They already knew how it would end. They just didn't realize they were about to get it completely wrong. Victoria Langford stopped just a few feet away, close enough for the faint scent of expensive perfume to settle into the air between them. Her smile still perfectly shaped, but now edged with something sharper, something deliberate, as if she had already decided exactly what kind of person stood in front of her and what should be done about it. "Excuse me," she said, her voice smooth and controlled, carrying just enough volume to draw the attention of those nearby, without seeming overt. "I think you might be a little lost." A few soft laughs followed behind her, light and practiced, the kind that never sounded loud but always managed to land exactly where it was meant to. Evelyn turned her gaze toward her, calm, unhurried, meeting Victoria's eyes without challenge and without submission, simply present, and that alone caused the smallest flicker of irritation to pass through Victoria's expression before it was quickly concealed again. "I am exactly where I need to be," Evelyn replied quietly, her tone even, her voice neither defensive nor apologetic, just certain. The response hung in the air for a moment, unexpected in its steadiness, and for a split second, the balance shifted ever so slightly before Victoria let out a soft, amused breath, tilting her head as if indulging a child. "That is interesting," she said, her lips curving again, "because this space is private. Our tenants and guests value a certain standard." Her eyes moved again over Evelyn's clothing, slower this time, more intentional, as if each detail confirmed her earlier judgment. Behind her, one of the women crossed her arms, another leaned in slightly, their expressions mirroring the same quiet superiority, the same unspoken agreement that this situation was already decided. A nearby sales associate glanced over from the boutique entrance, hesitating, unsure whether to intervene or remain still, caught between protocol and perception. Evelyn did not move, did not step back, did not attempt to explain herself further, and that stillness began to draw more attention than any argument ever could. Victoria's smile tightened just slightly as she noticed it, as if the absence of submission unsettled her more than resistance would have. "Perhaps," Victoria continued, her tone now a touch cooler, "someone should assist you in finding the correct exit." And with that, she made a small gesture toward a security guard positioned near the corridor, a subtle motion, but one that carried weight, expectation, authority. The guard straightened, hesitating for a fraction of a second before beginning to walk toward them, his expression professional but uncertain, clearly aware that something about this moment did not feel entirely routine. The surrounding conversations had begun to fade now, replaced by a quiet awareness spreading across the space, heads turning, eyes watching, the polished calm of the plaza shifting into something more tense, more focused. Evelyn finally glanced toward the approaching guard, then back to Victoria, her expression unchanged, her eyes steady in a way that did not match the situation. And that was when the first real crack appeared, not in words, but in atmosphere, because there was something about the way she stood there, not defensive, not nervous, not even surprised, that did not align with the role they had already assigned to her. Victoria sensed it, even if she could not yet name it. And for the briefest moment, her confidence faltered beneath the surface before she reinforced it with a sharper tone. "I would prefer not to escalate this," she said, just loud enough for others to hear, positioning herself as composed, reasonable, justified. But Evelyn's gaze did not shift, and when she finally spoke again, it was softer than before, almost gentle, yet it carried a weight that did not belong to someone being dismissed. "You already have," she said. The guard slowed his steps without realizing it, the air tightening further, the silence stretching just a little longer than it should have. And somewhere in that pause, something invisible began to turn, though no one in that moment yet understood exactly what was about to change. The guard slowed to a stop just behind Victoria, his hand hovering uncertainly at his side, as if waiting for a clearer signal. But none came, because something in the air had shifted, something subtle but undeniable, and even he could feel it without understanding why. Victoria's expression hardened slightly, the polished calm beginning to strain under the weight of a situation that was no longer unfolding the way she expected. And that loss of control, however small, irritated her more than she cared to show. "I believe I was being polite," she said, her tone now firmer, her posture straighter, as if reasserting authority through sheer presence. "This is a private property, and we do not allow just anyone to wander through as they please." Her words landed carefully, each one chosen to sound reasonable while carrying a quiet edge of exclusion, and the women behind her nodded subtly, reinforcing the narrative she was building. Evelyn remained where she was, her gaze steady, her breathing calm, as though the tension gathering around her did not belong to her at all. And that composure began to feel less like passivity and more like something deliberate, something controlled. A young employee near the boutique shifted his weight, glancing between Evelyn and Victoria, clearly aware that whatever was happening had moved beyond a simple misunderstanding, but unsure which side he was supposed to stand on. Victoria took a small step closer, closing the distance just enough to make the interaction feel more personal, more pointed, her voice lowering slightly, though still loud enough for those nearby to hear. "If you have business here, I suggest you state it clearly. Otherwise, I will have no choice but to ask security to escort you out." There it was, no longer implied, but spoken, the line drawn cleanly in front of everyone watching. The surrounding space grew quieter, Conversations fading entirely now, replaced by a collective stillness, as if the entire plaza was holding its breath, waiting to see how this would end. Evelyn's eyes did not waver, and for the first time, there was the faintest shift in her expression, not anger, not fear, but something closer to recognition, as though she had seen this moment before, in different places, with different faces, the same assumption repeating itself over and over again. She reached into her bag slowly, deliberately, every movement measured, and for a brief second, Victoria's attention sharpened, watching closely, expecting perhaps an explanation, a document, something that would justify the interruption of her carefully controlled environment. But Evelyn did not produce anything for them, not immediately. Instead, she paused, her hand resting lightly against the edge of her phone, her gaze lifting once more to meet Victoria's. And when she spoke, her voice was soft, almost reflective, yet it carried across the silence with surprising clarity. Do you always decide who belongs here based on what they wear? The question was simple, but it landed differently than anything said before, not defensive, not confrontational, just precise. A ripple of discomfort moved through the onlookers, subtle but real, because now the moment was no longer just about one woman being out of place. It was about something deeper, something they were all suddenly aware of. Victoria's lips pressed together briefly, her smile fading for the first time as she searched for a response that would maintain control without acknowledging the shift that had just occurred. And in that hesitation, however brief, the balance tilted again, just slightly. The guard remained still, uncertain. The employees watched, silent, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of an elevator chiming echoed through the lobby, unnoticed by most, but not by Evelyn, whose eyes flickered for just a fraction of a second toward the far end of the hall before returning to Victoria, calm as ever, as if she already knew exactly what was coming next. The soft chime of the elevator echoed again, clearer this time, cutting through the tension like a quiet signal that something unseen had just shifted into motion. But no one in the gathered crowd turned toward it, no one except Evelyn, whose gaze flickered briefly in that direction before settling once more, calm and composed, as if the outcome of this moment had already been decided long before anyone else realized they were part of it. Victoria followed the silence rather than the sound, her attention fixed entirely on maintaining control of the situation, her posture rigid, her expression sharpened into something more deliberate, more forceful, as though she could press reality back into place through sheer certainty. I asked you a question, she said, her voice now losing the softness it once carried, the polite veneer thinning just enough to reveal the impatience beneath. What business do you have here? Each word landed with precision, not loud, but undeniable, meant to remind everyone watching exactly who held authority. In this space, the guard shifted his stance again, glancing between the two women, waiting for a clear command, his uncertainty growing with every passing second that Evelyn refused to react the way he expected. Evelyn did not answer immediately, and that pause stretched longer than it should have, long enough for discomfort to settle into the edges of the room, long enough for people to begin questioning what exactly they were witnessing. Her silence was not empty, it was measured, intentional, as if she were allowing something to arrive rather than rushing to defend herself. A faint murmur moved through the onlookers, subtle but present, curiosity beginning to replace certainty, and that alone was enough to unsettle Victoria further, because control, once questioned, rarely returns the same way. This is becoming unnecessary, Victoria added, her tone tightening, her patience thinning in a way she could no longer fully conceal. Security, she said, turning her head just slightly, no longer gesturing but directing. Escort her out. The words landed firmly this time, no longer implied, no longer optional. The guard took a step forward, then another, his shoes echoing faintly against the marble floor, the sound amplified by the silence that had fallen across the plaza. And still, Evelyn did not move, did not step back, did not raise her voice. She simply reached into her bag once more, slower now, deliberate in a way that seemed almost at odds with the urgency being placed upon her. Victoria watched closely, expecting hesitation, perhaps even panic, but found none, and that absence began to feel heavier than any resistance could have been. Just as the guard came within arm's reach, Evelyn lifted her phone, her thumb pressing lightly against the screen, and then she spoke, not to Victoria, not to the guard, but into the quiet space itself, her voice soft, steady, carrying with it a calm authority that did not match her appearance. "You might want to wait," she said. The guard hesitated mid-step, his movement slowing as if something in her tone had reached him before her words fully did, and that single pause was enough to fracture the certainty that had filled the room. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, irritation flashing more clearly now. "There is nothing to wait for," she replied quickly, too quickly, as though the moment needed to be contained before it could expand further. "This is not how things work here." But even as she said it, there was the faintest shift in the air behind her, subtle at first, then growing. The sound of hurried footsteps approaching from the far end of the lobby, distinct against the polished floor. One by one, heads began to turn, drawn not by instruction but by instinct. And as the sound grew closer, the expressions in the room began to change, confusion replacing confidence, curiosity overtaking judgment. Evelyn did not turn this time. She did not need to. Her gaze remained forward, steady, almost patient, as if she had simply been waiting for everything to catch up to what she already knew. The guard lowered his hand slightly, uncertain now, caught between the command he had been given and the shift he could no longer ignore. Victoria stood still, her posture unchanged, but something beneath it had begun to crack, something small but undeniable, because for the first time since this moment began, she was no longer completely certain that she was in control, and somewhere just behind her, the footsteps came to a sudden stop. The footsteps stopped just behind Victoria, close enough that the subtle shift in air made her straighten instinctively, her confidence still present but no longer as effortless as before, and for a brief moment, no one spoke, no one moved, as if the entire plaza had been suspended in a single breath. Then a voice, calm but urgent, broke through the silence. "Miss Carter." And the effect was immediate, not loud, not dramatic, but precise, like a key turning in a lock that no one else had realized was there. Victoria's expression flickered, confusion appearing before she could mask it, and slowly, she turned, her heels pivoting against the marble as she faced the direction of the voice. Three individuals stood just a few steps away, sharply dressed, their presence unmistakable not because of their attire, but because of the way they carried themselves, focused, alert, and unmistakably deferential toward one person and one person only. The man at the front, mid-40s, composed yet visibly tense, stepped forward slightly, his eyes moving past Victoria without acknowledgement and landing directly on Evelyn. "We have been trying to reach you," he continued, his tone respectful, almost apologetic. "There was a change to the board schedule, and they are waiting upstairs." The words settled into the space, and with them, the atmosphere shifted completely. The guard lowered his hand fully now, stepping back without being told, his role suddenly unclear in a situation that no longer followed the rules he understood. The employees nearby exchanged quick glances, their earlier certainty dissolving into confusion, into realization that something far more significant was unfolding in front of them. Victoria remained still, her posture rigid, her mind working to catch up with what she had just heard, but the pieces did not fit, not yet, not in a way that made sense. Her gaze moved from the man to Evelyn and back again, searching for context, for explanation, for anything that would restore the narrative she had already decided. Evelyn, however, did not rush to fill that silence. She did not step forward, did not change her expression. She simply stood there, her calm now no longer subtle but undeniable, and for the first time, it was no longer invisible. "I see," Evelyn said softly, her voice steady, as if this interruption had been expected all along, as if everything that had just happened was merely a delay, not a disruption. She glanced briefly toward the man, then back at Victoria, and in that single motion, the dynamic shifted completely, not through force, not through volume, but through presence. The man followed her gaze, his attention finally acknowledging Victoria, but only for a moment, only long enough to register her position in the scene. And when he spoke again, it was with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Victoria opened her mouth slightly, then closed it. The words she had been so certain of moments ago now nowhere to be found, replaced by a growing awareness that she had misread something fundamental, something important. The women behind her shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence gone, replaced by uncertainty, their laughter now absent, their silence louder than any reaction could have been. Evelyn took a small step forward, not toward the man, but just enough to reposition herself within the space, her presence now at the center of it, no longer an outsider, no longer questioned. "No," she said calmly, her eyes never leaving Victoria. "There is no problem." And the weight of that sentence settled heavily, because it did not erase what had just happened. It simply redefined who had the authority to decide whether it mattered. The man nodded slightly, accepting her answer without hesitation, without question, and that unquestioning respect spoke louder than anything else that had been said. Victoria stood frozen, her certainty gone, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the realization beginning to form beneath it, because in that moment, she understood something she had not considered before, something she had dismissed entirely, and it was already too late to undo it. The room remained silent, but it was no longer the same silence as before. It was heavier now, charged with understanding, with the unmistakable shift of power that no one could ignore, and at the center of it all, Evelyn Carter stood exactly where she had said she would be, exactly where she belonged. Victoria Langford felt it before she could fully understand it, the subtle but undeniable shift in how the room now oriented itself, not toward her, not toward the cluster of elites she had once led so effortlessly, but toward the quiet woman who had not raised her voice once, who had not argued, who had not defended herself, and yet now stood at the center of something far larger than anyone had anticipated. The man who had addressed Evelyn stepped slightly to the side, creating space rather than occupying it, his posture respectful in a way that was not performative but instinctive, and behind him, the other two individuals remained attentive, their focus entirely on Evelyn as though awaiting direction. Victoria's mind moved quickly, attempting to regain control, to reassemble the situation into something familiar, something manageable, but the more she tried, the more it slipped beyond her reach. "I was not informed of any executive visit today," she said finally, her voice measured, carefully composed, though the edge beneath it had not entirely disappeared. And in that single sentence, she attempted to reclaim authority, to remind everyone present that she still held a position, still had standing, still belonged at the top of this carefully structured environment. The man turned his head slightly toward her, acknowledging her for the first time with a neutral expression, neither dismissive nor deferential, simply factual. "This was not an executive visit," he replied, his tone calm, precise. "This is Ms. Carter's property." And with that, the final piece fell into place. The words did not echo, they did not need to, because their impact was immediate, absolute, leaving no space for interpretation, no room for doubt. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before, not tense, but definitive, as if the entire structure of the moment had just been rewritten in a single line. Victoria's breath caught almost imperceptibly, her posture remaining upright, but something within it no longer held the same certainty, her eyes moving once more to Evelyn, searching now not for flaws, not for justification, but for confirmation, and what she found was not triumph, not satisfaction, but something far quieter, far more unsettling, composure. Evelyn did not step forward, did not assert herself. She simply existed within the truth that had just been revealed, her presence now fully understood, no longer questioned, no longer dismissed. The women behind Victoria shifted again, their earlier confidence gone entirely, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of how quickly their assumptions had unraveled, how easily their laughter had turned into silence. The guard took another step back, creating distance, no longer part of the confrontation, no longer needed to enforce a decision that had already been overturned without force. Victoria opened her mouth as if to respond, but the words did not come, because there was nothing she could say that would restore what had just been lost, not status, not control, not certainty. Evelyn's gaze remained steady, and when she finally spoke, Her voice was as calm as it had been from the beginning, unchanged by the shift around her, unchanged by the realization settling over the room. "I come here often," she said simply, her tone neither defensive nor explanatory, just honest. "I like to see how things are running." And in that moment, every detail from before took on a different meaning. The way she had looked at the marble, the lighting, the structure, it had never been curiosity, it had been familiarity, responsibility. Victoria felt the weight of that understanding settle in fully now. The realization not just of who Evelyn was, but of what she herself had done, not through anger, not through cruelty, but through assumption, through a quiet certainty that had never been questioned until now. The room remained still, but it was no longer watching a confrontation, it was witnessing a reversal, one that required no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, only truth revealed at the precise moment it could no longer be ignored. And in that stillness, one thing became clear to everyone present. Some lessons do not arrive loudly, they arrive quietly, and once they do, they cannot be undone. No one spoke, not because they were told to remain silent, but because something far stronger had taken hold of the room, the kind of silence that follows realization, the kind that forces people to confront not what they see, but what they assumed they understood. Victoria Langford stood perfectly still, her posture still elegant, still composed on the surface, but beneath it, something had shifted in a way that could not be hidden anymore. Her certainty had been replaced with something unfamiliar, something uncomfortable, awareness. Her eyes lingered on Evelyn Carter, no longer scanning for flaws, no longer measuring her against an unspoken standard, but searching, trying to reconcile the image she had created with the truth now standing in front of her. The gap between those two things was wider than she expected, and it showed. One of the women behind her shifted her weight, her arms uncrossing slowly, as if the physical act mirrored the quiet unraveling of her earlier confidence. Another avoided eye contact entirely, her gaze drifting toward the polished floor, suddenly finding interest in the reflection she had ignored moments ago. The employees nearby stood straighter now, not out of tension, but out of recognition, their earlier hesitation replaced with a different kind of awareness, one that came from understanding who truly held authority in this space. The man beside Evelyn glanced briefly at her, waiting, not speaking, not interrupting, because whatever came next would come from her, and only her. Evelyn took a slow breath, not as preparation, but as acknowledgement, her eyes moving across the room, not with judgment, not with triumph, but with clarity, as if she were seeing everything exactly as it was, without distortion, without assumption. When she spoke, her voice remained soft, but it carried effortlessly, filling the space without force. "I designed this place to feel welcoming," she said, her gaze shifting slightly, taking in the marble floors, the open layout, the careful balance of light and structure. A place where people would want to come, not because they were allowed, but because they felt they belonged. The words settled deeply, not loud, but precise. And for those listening, they carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. Victoria's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, the realization settling further, because those words were not just a statement, they were a mirror, reflecting not the building, but what had just happened within it. Evelyn's eyes returned to her, steady, calm, and unmistakably clear. "Somewhere along the way," she continued, "that idea seems to have been replaced." She did not accuse, did not point, did not raise her tone, but the meaning was undeniable, and it reached every corner of the room. The guard stood quietly now, no longer part of the scene, his presence reduced to that of a witness, like everyone else. Victoria finally inhaled slowly, her composure rebuilding, but differently this time, not from confidence, but from recognition. "If there has been a misunderstanding," she began, her voice measured, carefully chosen, each word placed with intention, "then I would like to correct it." The sentence was polite, controlled, but beneath it was something new, something she had not needed before: humility. Evelyn listened without interruption, her expression unchanged, not dismissive, not accepting, simply present, allowing the words to exist without rushing to respond. The room remained still, but it was no longer waiting for conflict, it was waiting for resolution. for something that would define what this moment meant beyond the tension that had created it. Evelyn took a small step forward, not to close distance, but to anchor herself within it, her presence now fully understood by everyone watching. "It is not about correcting a misunderstanding," she said gently, her tone steady. "It is about recognizing one." And with that, the final layer settled into place, not as a confrontation, but as a truth that no one in that room could ignore, because in that moment, it was no longer about who owned the building. It was about who understood what it was meant to be. The silence did not break. Immediately, it deepened, settling into the space like something permanent, something that could not be undone or ignored. And for a long moment, no one moved, because there was nothing left to perform, nothing left to pretend. Victoria Langford stood there, her composure no longer the polished shield it had been, but something quieter now, something more deliberate, as if each breath required thought, each word required care. And for the first time in a long time, she was no longer certain how to proceed. The women behind her shifted again, their earlier presence reduced to something almost invisible, no longer leading, no longer reinforcing, simply existing in the wake of a moment that had stripped away the comfort of assumption. One of them lowered her gaze entirely, another adjusted her posture awkwardly, their silence now carrying a different weight, not confidence, but reflection. Evelyn Carter remained still, her presence steady, her expression unchanged, but now fully understood, not just as the owner of the space, but as the person who had shaped its purpose, and that realization carried far more weight than any title ever could. The man beside her waited quietly, his earlier urgency replaced with patience, because whatever came next was no longer about schedules or meetings, it was about something far more fundamental. Victoria finally exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just slightly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than before, no longer carrying the same edge, no longer shaped by certainty. "Then I have failed to uphold that standard," she said, each word measured, deliberate, and in that admission, something shifted again, not in power, but in tone. The room seemed to listen differently now, not as spectators, but as participants in something that extended beyond a single interaction. Evelyn's eyes remained on her, steady, not unforgiving, not dismissive, simply present, allowing the words to exist without interruption. The air no longer felt tense, but it was not relaxed either. It was something in between, something reflective, as if the entire space had paused to consider what it had become and what it was meant to be. A faint movement near the boutique caught attention as one of the employees stepped forward slightly, then stopped, uncertain whether to act or remain still, caught between old habits and new awareness. Evelyn finally moved again, a small step, not toward Victoria, but slightly to the side, her gaze sweeping briefly across the plaza, taking in the people, the structure, the environment she had envisioned, and when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet clarity that reached everyone present. "Standards are not defined by who is allowed in," she said gently. "They are defined by how people are treated when they arrive." The words settled deeply, not as criticism, but as truth. And for those listening, they carried more weight than any rule or policy ever could. Victoria nodded once, slowly, not as agreement alone, but as understanding, the kind that comes when something is seen clearly for the first time. The guard remained still at the edge of the scene, no longer uncertain, but aware, his role now defined not by enforcement, but by observation. The employees stood straighter, their earlier hesitation replaced by a quiet readiness, as if something within them had been recalibrated. The space itself felt different now, not physically, but perceptually, as though the meaning of it had shifted without a single object being moved. Evelyn turned her attention back to Victoria, her expression calm, her voice unchanged. "What matters now," she continued, "is what happens next." And that sentence did not close the moment, it opened it, leaving space for choice, for action, for something that would define whether this was simply an incident or the beginning of something different. Victoria held her gaze, no longer searching, no longer judging, but considering, and in that quiet exchange, something new took shape, not dominance, not submission, but recognition, the kind that does not fade easily, the kind that changes how people see, how they act, how they decide who belongs. And in that moment, the room was no longer silent because it had to be. It was silent because it understood. The moment did not end with applause or raised voices. It ended the way truth often does, quietly, leaving behind something far more lasting than noise. And as Evelyn Carter stood there, the weight of everything that had unfolded settled into the space like a final, undeniable imprint. Victoria Langford held her gaze a moment longer, no longer as someone defending a position, but as someone who had seen something clearly for the first time, and slowly, she stepped back, not out of retreat, but out of recognition, creating space where before she had tried to control it. The women behind her followed without being told, their movements subdued, their earlier presence reduced to something reflective, almost cautious, as if they understood now that what had just happened was not simply an awkward moment, but a correction, one that would stay with them long after they left that marble floor. The employees near the boutique straightened with a different kind of awareness, their eyes no longer uncertain, but attentive, as though the meaning of their roles had shifted in real time. Even the guard, who had once stepped forward with authority, now stood still with quiet understanding, his posture no longer about enforcement, but about presence. Evelyn turned slightly, her gaze moving across the plaza one more time, taking in the light, the architecture, the people, the purpose she had once imagined, and for a brief moment, there was something almost reflective in her expression, not disappointment, not satisfaction, but clarity, as if she had seen exactly what needed to be seen. The man beside her spoke softly, reminding her of the meeting upstairs, but there was no urgency now, only patience, because even he understood that what had just occurred carried more weight than any scheduled discussion. Evelyn nodded once, then began to walk, her steps measured, calm, the same way she had entered. But now every movement carried a different meaning, not because she had changed, but because everyone else had. As she passed Victoria, she paused for just a fraction of a second, not long enough to create tension, just enough to acknowledge presence. And in that brief stillness, there were no harsh words, no final judgment, only a quiet understanding that did not need to be spoken. Then she continued forward, toward the elevators, toward whatever came next, leaving behind a space that no longer felt the same. The room remained silent, but it was no longer empty silence. It was filled with awareness, with reflection, with the quiet realization that dignity is not something granted by status, but something revealed through action, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. Victoria remained where she was, her posture composed, but her perspective altered, her eyes following Evelyn not with judgment, but with thought, as if replaying the moment, understanding it in a way she had not before. And as the elevator doors closed softly in the distance, the echo that followed was not loud, but it lingered, a reminder that the smallest moments often carry the greatest lessons. Because in the end, it was never about who owned the building. It was about who understood what it was meant to stand for. And that truth, once revealed, reshaped everything around it. Respect often reveals itself when you least expect it. If you enjoy stories that uncover truth, dignity, and hidden strength, do not forget to like and subscribe. The next story might just change the way you see the world. Thank you so much for watching.